Hello and welcome to Brain Says Strange Things. I'm Patrick, this is my brother Jordan, and this is the podcast where we talk about horror movies and science fiction movies and all kinds of movies. We are going to talk about a couple of classic science fiction films from the 1950s in this episode. I was just kind of in the mood to watch some classic 1950s sci-fi movies, so
why not?
That's usually how we come up with the ideas for these episodes. And we picked The Day the Earth Stood Still and Forbidden Planet.
So it's always hard to find the classics of that genre. It's such a huge genre.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of those kinds of movies, and it's not my kind of primary genre, obviously.
Yeah.
We tend to like horror movies and monster movies. But the 1950s kind of alien invasion movies is sort of an adjacent genre. And
it's a cousin.
yeah, and I'm sort of embarrassed to say I had never seen either one of these classic films until we watched them this evening.
I've seen both, but I just realized it while watching them that I'd seen both.
Well, the thing about these movies is they're very... I think we chose well in terms of representative films in the 50s, you know, flying saucer, alien
they're kind of different
genre.
ends of the spectrum a little bit.
Yeah, but they also really typify a lot of what would become the tropes and cliches of that genre. Flying saucers.
You probably have every cliche within those two movies.
Yeah, they're
together.
very generic in a way.
Yeah.
Which make them a little tough, I think, for modern audiences. So we'll get into that a little bit. So the first one we watched was The Day the Earth Stood Still. This is a very well-known film. This is the one with the giant, well, not Godzilla giant, but the large...
Not everything compares to Godzilla.
No, the large alien robot
Yes.
named Gort.
He's 8 feet tall, I think.
Yeah, who accompanies Klaatu to the planet Earth. A flying saucer lands in Washington, D.C., and Klaatu is a humanoid alien who's come with a very important message for all the governments of Earth. But before he can deliver that message, he's shot and kind of forced...
Right away, yeah.
Yeah,
like right
by
before
humanity and kind of forced to go on the run. He becomes involved with a human woman and her son before
a little
finally...
too involved with her son,
Yeah,
maybe.
before finally being able to deliver his message at the end of the film. So it's a very basic story with a... You know, it's a message movie, you know, about world peace and all that stuff. But it's a very well-known film. It's directed by Robert Wise.
Yes.
Very well produced.
I didn't know that either.
A very well-produced, very well-acted movie. It looks terrific.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not B films. You know, they kind of have a camp quality today.
Well, Forbidden Planet might be a little
A little bit, but the production values, I think, were pretty high. Yeah, Day the Earth Stood Still, it's a very classy production. But as we said, it can be a little tough for modern audiences. The filmmakers take the material very seriously, which I think probably helped it to have quite an impact at the time.
Yeah.
But today, it comes off as rather dry, very, shall we say, deliberately paced. Right? These movies are each only an hour and a half long, but you really feel each of those 90 minutes. So I liked both of these movies. I didn't dislike them, but they didn't really pull me in the way that...
That's always the problem with these sci-fi... I was going to say B movies, but they're not B movies.
No, they aren't at all.
Kind of the sci-fi movies from this era, I guess we'll say.
Yeah.
Is that they're always kind of lacking, like a specific look to them. Like, you can't tell who the director is, which is really weird. Because you can't... Like, they all look the same that way. They all have the same kind of style, basically.
To some degree.
The Day the Earth Stood Still had a little bit more to that, though. Because Robert Wise does all those kind of, like, big production movies. He does... I know for sure he did that West Side Story. So he does like big musicals with big crowds.
Yeah, he's a great director.
And that intro is really good. It's kind of like, I was thinking like, why does this work as well as Independence Day does? You know, with the creepy spaceship coming in. Independence Day is a giant ship hovering over an entire city, and this is just kind of like a little blip floating in the sky. And I think each of those kind of equally is creepy, just kind of the way it's done, because you see it land in the middle of a ball field. And it's pretty, I mean, there's probably some like matte painting stuff going on there, maybe. They might have had like a big crowd like that, but it looked like a giant crowd surrounding it. It looked fairly realistic for that time period, so I kind of like that part of it.
Yeah.
And, well, like mood-wise too, I mean, even when he's being introduced, the alien Klaatu, right? When he's being introduced, he'll always be like in the shadows, sort of. Even though you already kind of, you know what he looks like already. There's no reason to do that, but he just kind of...
He's kind of set apart as and he looks human, but he's always kind of set apart.
He's very otherworldly in every sense. Like, even the way he talks. He blows his cover almost in every sentence he's speaking, but...
he's sort of Spock-like. In a way,
he kind of looks like
he's very tall and gaunt. He speaks very intelligently. He's a bit removed emotionally, and he's a bit of a hard ass. We find out as the movie goes along. I mean, he comes with a sort of peaceful message, but it has
by the end he's
an
kind
undercurrent
of
of violence. Yeah, so it's a very interesting film, kind of a cerebral film somewhat.
It's just like basically like Cold War era, like, you know, the Red Scare, communist basically story. I mean, like everybody knows that.
Yeah, I mean, and that was my thing about this movie. Like, it was so basic,
obvious, and
so obvious that there was just nothing really to hold on to. Like at the end of the movie, when Klaatu finally delivers his speech, you're kind of like, okay, well, that's sort of what we assumed you would say.
Well, also what I thought about that, and I kind of thought this about the other movie too, is that there really is no reason for this to be an alien. Isn't like anybody could be delivering the same dialogue and stuff. I'm not really sure why it's put in a sci-fi movie like that.
But this is kind of a classic trope of like 1950s science fiction
for the aliens to be like, screw you, I'm out of here.
Well, no, but like using aliens and you know things like that to comment on contemporary issues from a bit of a removed perspective. You can kind of talk about what's going on.
Yeah, but it wasn't really like from an alien perspective, though. That's kind of the point. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think that was that. I think that would be the only way to really deliver such a broad message about all of humanity and have it hope to be taken seriously, is to put it in this context of this visitor from another world. I mean, that's very common in many science fiction stories, certainly into the 1960s with Star Trek and things like that.
Yeah, and they act like an atomic bomb is going to blow up the entire planet, whereas it wouldn't probably take out a city, you know.
Right, yeah.
So the whole world's in danger, but you never really get that sense. And that's kind of maybe why it doesn't work, because Robert Wise does all those big productions. And the alien, the guy, as soon as he lands, he goes, because he wants to live with the humans. You don't really know for how long, or like how quickly he's going to learn this. It's going to take forever.
Yeah.
Because sometimes he's like sitting at the breakfast table with them, just talking about... They're just talking about what's going on.
Well, that's the problem with both of these movies. Again, especially from like a modern perspective, when you're used to things moving a little bit
I'm trying to put myself in the mindset, because I've seen a lot of those movies, but this, I don't know, it's almost like it's a little too easy to follow. It's like,
and there's not enough of a sense of urgency in either of these films. There's a lot of meandering.
Yeah, you don't get the sense the whole world's in danger. I mean, at the very end, there's people dressed up in costumes from other lands.
Yes.
You know. And it's like, that's the only sense that you get that anyone on the entire planet even knows what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
He's hanging out at a hotel.
Right.
Like, right down the road from where his spaceship landed. And then you're supposed to have the sense that this whole global scare is going on.
That's
and
true.
You really don't.
Yeah, that's true. You don't really get the sense of a global community coming together. It's focused on a very small community in America, in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, you kind of think that Robert Wise would be able to do a story like that, too.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know. I mean, he did The Haunting, too. Which is another, like,
which is
really
a very small
area.
film. That's a terrific movie.
Yeah. Maybe it's kind of like a mix between the two, I guess, maybe. A little bit. Not scary, though. So.
Yeah. So, well, I don't know if there's too much else to say about this movie. I mean, I don't want to. It's not a bad movie.
No, I like it.
I think if you're interested in the genre, you need to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know beyond that what it really has to offer to a modern audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, like, the robot... Gort is
kind of cool looking.
He's kind of creative looking. I mean, he looks kind of like Gumby a little bit, but he's not like what you would picture if you pictured a robot from a science fiction movie. Spaceship is just like a flying saucer.
Yeah,
Alien looks like you said, he's just like Spock. He's a human being. He's like a really cleaned up human being.
Yeah, they did a good job with this
Pretty
movie
much
with like the look of the aliens and the alien technology. You know, a lot of times, and Forbidden Planet was like this. You know, images of the future age very quickly. But that's not really a problem with Forbidden Planet. The alien technology is very sleek. It kind of, you could kind of make this movie today and have the robot and the ship look the same, and it would work. You know, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I get it, because like he didn't have like ray guns.
It's not clunky.
He didn't have like
Buck Rogers,
levers that he's pulling. He's just kind of like waves his hand over the controls, and then it works. And, I mean, like he's operating his iPad or something. It's like,
yeah.
So yeah, it's not distracting at all.
So in that way, it was very effective, and it's a bit easier to take it seriously again, but it's not very exciting, I would say.
Yeah. It's like a stripped down disaster movie, essentially. A stripped way down disaster movie.
What did you think about Klaatu's message at the end of the movie? Because that's kind of like
it was kind of confusing.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Well, you know...
Was it supposed to be like that? Was it supposed to be like a comment that kind of didn't quite make sense?
Well, I think it made sense, but I think it's interesting to think about, because, like, during the movie, I kind of assumed, like, oh, okay, this will be, like, Klaatu is so evolved, and he represents what humanity will hopefully one day become, and point out, all our petty squabbles. But then when he described the way that his society worked...
Yeah.
You kind of, on the one hand, you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of a perfect society. But then on the other hand, you're kind of like, oh, maybe that would be horrible, and that's not what humanity would want.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
So it's this interesting, and I don't know if that was intentional by the filmmakers, but it's this interesting kind of ambivalence that's kind of presented to the audience at the end, and then the movie ends, and it just kind of leaves you with that.
Yeah, because
so I kind of like that about the movie.
A lot of those sci-fi movies do that kind of same story, where it's like the aliens are sent from Earth, or sent to Earth, and you don't know why they're there, and you like immediately you fear anything alien, or Earth does at least. That's probably, I don't know if that's unique to us, but you slowly find out that they're here to help you, to help the entire planet. Like, you guys are so dumb. I'm evolved past you. Let me kind of show you how to do it right, and then you won't end up killing yourselves. Essentially,
and this is the ultimate story of that type. The Day the Earth.
Yeah, this is like a really good representation of that. And then at the end, he's explaining like how, like you said, how it works.
How his
and essentially they're pretty much ruled by these robots that they've created.
They're part of basically a united federation of planets.
Yeah.
And their society has created
like little policemen.
A police cast of robots that have complete authority over them in matters of violence, and that gives them a kind of freedom, and that's what they suggest that the path that humanity follow.
Yeah, so
that's a troublesome message.
You could picture it going either way, because you could picture him delivering that message, and you could picture the human beings like rising up and be like, fuck this. Like, we don't want to be ruled by all these robots and everything.
Yeah, it's ambiguous.
Yeah, and actually that is kind of a good point to that movie, because it leaves it like that.
Yes.
The ship just flies away.
Klaatu gives his speech, and then there's a bunch of static shots of all the different, world representatives. There's no dialogue, no music, and then Klaatu leaves with this kind of ambivalent message. And I guess it's up to you as an audience to determine, is Klaatu right? Is he wrong? Is that the path humanity would want to take? Is that true freedom? I mean, these are pretty big questions that the best science fiction really has you ask yourself. So I wish it had been a bit more of an exciting film getting there.
Yeah, it should have been a bigger build-up.
But it's a well-made movie. And I do think it's interesting to leave it on that ambiguous note.
Yeah, it's also not a stupid message either.
No,
it's
yeah.
The best you could say is that it kind of makes you think a
It
little
does
bit.
make you think.
Like I said, it's pretty simple.
It's
a
very
simple
basic.
story,
It's very broad. But
they kind of like shelved that idea with a nice kind of sci-fi touches a little bit. So it works. It works really well.
It works. Okay, well, so then we watched Forbidden Planet, which after the rather dry, very serious The Day the Earth Stood Still, I was hoping was going to be a bit more of a Buck Rogers type adventure. This is about humans going out into space, into the future. A young Leslie Nielsen is the lead hero in this, which is kind of odd to see him in that role because I think he's most known for the Naked Gun
he's Frank
movies these days. But he's the rather young, good-looking captain of this ship. And they go off to investigate the disappearance of a previous vessel.
Another familiar story.
On this planet. Very familiar, especially, I keep bringing up Star Trek, but this movie really reminded me of
this looks very Star Trek.
Even
though this is before.
It looked like Star Trek, and the story could have easily been an episode of Star Trek. There are many episodes investigating a missing ship, go to a planet, there's one old guy and a beautiful girl, there's a mystery. Yes. I mean, this was a Star Trek plot. And it also was about probably 45...
He was good like a proto-Kirk.
Oh, very much so. And this is what Star Trek was born out of, although Star Trek subverted and made that dynamic a little bit more complex, but it also was about 45 minutes worth of story in a 98-minute movie. So that was a real problem with pacing. But this movie famously introduces Robbie the Robot, who appeared not only in this film, but in a lot of television series.
Best character in the movie.
Best character in the movie. He became a regular on Lost in Space. Each of these movies has a really iconic robot. There's Gort in The Earth Stood Still, and Robbie the Robot, who's supposed to be kind of a comedic character. Although a lot of the comedy,
he was hilarious.
A lot of the comedy I think felt pretty flat in.
Yeah, it was also forced too. I mean, there were really obvious jokes too.
Yeah, it was like kind of the plot wasn't going very fast, but it would completely come to a stop, and there'd be a very forced comedic sequence.
Let's make Robbie burp.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't really.
Sounds like a funny idea.
It didn't really work, but some of the charm of that robot still came through. So you can kind of see how he
was kind of a proto-bender from Futurama.
He sort of, yeah. Well, he does. He consumes alcohol in this movie.
Yes.
So did I explain the plot of this movie? Not really.
No, kind of. They go
to a planet to investigate the disappearance of a previous spaceship. When they get there, they find all the crew is gone, the spaceship is gone. Only one scientist has survived, along with his daughter, who's beautiful and becomes involved with the male lead. The scientist has discovered the remains of that planet's ancient advanced civilization who had been wiped out millennia ago by some unknown purpose, and the scientist is kind of hoarding their technology. Meanwhile, the crew of our heroes are being attacked by some kind of invisible monster. Okay, so there's this big mystery going on, which I actually thought was it's a good mystery story. I liked Forbidden Planet. I didn't know.
Like it too.
I think it benefited too for me from not really knowing anything about it. I mean, I knew the title Forbidden Planet just as like a classic, film. I knew Robbie the Robot, but I really didn't even know what this movie was about. So it was a fun mystery, kind of figuring it out as it went along. But again, it didn't really add up to too much. It would have made a really good 45-minute episode of Star Trek, I think, as a feature film. Story-wise, it was a bit lacking, but it looked terrific. What did you think of Forbidden Planet?
I liked it a lot, with a little warning.
Yep, with a caveat.
It gets pretty boring and monotonous.
Well, there is, the extensive tour of the underground remains of the advanced civilization.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, it didn't really add up to anything. It was so boring. It was like I don't care. I felt like I was at the Science Museum as a kid and looking at the stuff that didn't really... None of that was going to factor into the plot later, except there's an a thing that makes you smarter, essentially. Yeah. That's a game.
There's a lot of padding in this movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of foam peanuts and stuffed in this movie.
There is. The characters are very generic, cookie cutter. There's not a lot going on.
Well, here's one thing that kind of made it at least somewhat tolerable to me is that the scene when you finally kind of get a glimpse of what the invisible alien looks like.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you thought of this. Interesting.
It's breaking through. So it's an invisible monster that's been attacking their spaceship that's landed there. They have a little base that they've set up.
And they set up an electrical barrier around the base.
They've got an electrical fence. And then they have radar so they can tell that it's coming, but they can't see it. And they're just kind of like firing into the dark. And then once it hits the fence, then you can kind of get like a general outline of it because there's like static going around it. And then the way they do it, like at first I was kind of like, oh boy, like it's animated essentially.
It's a cartoon.
It looks kind of like a lion or some kind of weird monster. I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty simple looking monster, which works in their favor a lot. They didn't try to go too overboard with it. But then there's also scenes where it's kind of like swatting at the guys.
And it picks a guy up.
And picks a guy up and kind of like throws him around. And that actually kind of looked pretty good. So I kind of gave him I kind of tipped my hat to them. Because what I was thinking up to that point, I'm like, you can't introduce something like an invisible monster into your movie and then have the reveal be like, like that, like
they
fall
set
flat.
Themselves up.
I was totally expecting that to happen, and it wasn't like the greatest thing I've ever seen, but I was kind of like, okay, that was good. Like I'll remember that in this movie. So, because I was just like, you're gonna lose either way because you need to be so confident in this one final like money shot.
Yeah,
it's like.
Because this is the monster. You know, like all these movies kind of have to have a monster. Even
it doesn't reveal what the plot's about. But still, as a sci-fi fan, which is what most people are going. People aren't going to these movies to get these messages out of the movies. That's just like a little bonus that they're throwing in there.
It's the monster that gets them into the theaters.
Yeah,
like the Meta-Luna Mutant in This Island Earth. It's not really a big part of the movie, but they had to have it in there.
Yeah.
So that's what this monster was. So you liked it, the animated...
Ultimately, I did. And I mean, I was just kind of surprised because I was expecting it to... I was like rolling my eyes almost. I was like, almost kind of like, please don't show the monster. Please don't even bother. Or this is going to be like the greatest thing ever. And it wasn't either, but does that make any sense?
It's memorable. No, I agree with you. I didn't know that if they were going to show the monster at all. And when they did and it was animated, at first I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. But then as the sequence went on, it was kind of impressive. You know, you have to... I guess you kind of have to be like us. You have to be able to appreciate like camp and artifice in monster movies.
I mean, it was a little like a Harryhausen or Roger Rabbit.
It was,
type of
yeah.
Thing.
I mean, it wasn't
interacting with the real.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer something like this to like them filming like a grasshopper and making it look giant or something. You know what I mean? Like this
or have a giant foam hand come in and swat him. You
like
know,
this was memorable. It didn't look real, but it was unique, and in its own way, it looked good. So I agree with you. I liked that sequence too. I thought it was pretty cool. Certainly the most memorable thing about this movie. Kind of jolted you out of the dull pacing of the rest of the film.
Yeah,
too.
I mean that's one little thing in the movie.
Yeah, it kind of woke you up a little bit. It's like, oh, there's a cartoon monster here. It's like, okay, what's going on? Yeah, so there was that. And not a whole lot else. You know, the final reveal of where this monster came from and what's really going on, even though it had been an intriguing mystery for a lot of the film.
It was kind of like a Corman-ish, Roger Corman type of, like almost like an Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, it was a little twist. It was very much. It was an episode of Star Trek, and it would have made a good episode of Star Trek as a feature. There's not
the
really
original
enough,
series.
Yes, as a feature, there's not really enough story there. I didn't think.
Yeah, I mean, even that stuff like. I kind of felt this way about how they should have done it with the story as they did with the monster, where it's building up and it's revealing that the scientist who's kind of hoarded all this information, he wants to keep it all to himself, and he'll just like he's drunk with power essentially, and he'll dole out the information to whoever he chooses. He doesn't want to hand it over to everybody because he thinks he's way above them. Kind of the same story as the other movie.
Yep.
But when he's explaining, and they explain that the monster is generated from his subconscious, right? So there are so many scenes where they're just like, even the one where he's like wrestling him and they dub over like dialogue, like, you created this monster from your subconscious, and like they're talking as they're fighting, and it's like, I got it already.
But I think that's a situation where like you have to kind of put yourself in the context of when this movie came out. Like science fiction is a lot more in the culture now than it used to be. These kinds of ideas.
Yeah, but there are movies like around the same time, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, where they don't do stuff like that too. So I mean, it's not like you don't always have to give them a pass for
No.
giving away like that.
True. True.
Like there are good ways and there are bad ways to tell that.
This
story.
movie definitely had a pacing problem. There was a lot of padding here.
But that's a good thing to like. I thought because where I was going with that, and I kind of forgot where I was going, but that part where they explain that it comes from his id.
Yep.
Like his subconscious mind. Like most people know what that is. I guess a '50s audience probably wouldn't know that much about that, but. Even the main character who's like he's a rocket scientist essentially. He's like, what is the id?
Right.
What is the id?
They had to have that exposition in there.
Yeah, he's like, well, I should know what this is, but you need to explain it. So that is a big problem with both these movies. It's all exposition. They don't know how to tell it like that.
And that's the least interesting part about science fiction too, is the explanation for how things work. And then what's Forbidden Planet just like puts the brakes on the plot and has long sequences of explaining things.
What's lacking from those types of movies is like what I was talking about earlier, is like an artistic kind of impression to, like, you need to tell like a certain filmmaker made this. All the exposition scenes are people standing in rooms. The Day the Earth Stood Still kind of does this a lot, which really annoys me, is that there are so many like scenes. Like I was telling you, you could cut together scenes of people walking into a room, introducing themselves, saying goodbye to each other. Yeah, like
it's very.
They walk in the room. That's basically what it is.
Yeah.
It's like it's so stiff and they're so wooden, and everybody's in their button-up suits.
Yeah,
and you just need.
You need a little juice in
there. You need something. You need a different angle. You need somebody. You need like someone who's actually trying to really act or something.
You know,
You need a cartoon alien attack.
Well, or you need some sex in there, like Captain Kirk, and you know what I mean. And
you need William Shatner.
I'm not an expert in science fiction, but I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I definitely feel like by the time you get to the late '60s and Star Trek, it had these same kinds of plots. They looked the same, but you had this kind of like
there's some sort of subtext.
Sexy, there's a lot of subtext. It's just a little juicier. There's a little bit more humanity in there. You know what I mean? And
that's it. You need more humanity in these.
You truly do. You need to bring them down to earth a little bit. You need to grub them up a little bit.
Because there are scenes in Forbidden Planet when the doctor is like, again, that stupid tour that he's taking him on, and he'll take him into a room and he'll like there's just long shots of him just like standing there in front of them with two guys just sitting in a room completely still, and he's reading all the dialogue of what's going on. It's like, holy crap, you could almost shoot the exact same scene in a different way, and you'd be like on the edge of your seat. Right. It's not necessarily a problem with what he's saying, it's just how it's being told.
Yeah, so I think that there's specific criticisms you can make of this movie regardless of context, but I do think that is kind of a staple of 50s sci-fi too. They are a bit stiff. They are a bit. And
I honestly, do kind of like the charm of that because it's kind of fun.
I like the charm of that to a certain extent, but there's also a reason that this is the first time we don't have a science fiction podcast. You know, it's not. It's not my favorite era in that genre.
I was gonna say let's not do this one again.
It's not. I mean, it's not my favorite era in that genre. I like the post kind of Star Trek. Definitely the post Star Wars. I like it when it gets a bit grittier, a bit more fast paced. But it's interesting to look at these kind of films because that's what so much of this other, type of entertainment comes from, and science fiction is huge these days. I mean, everything is science fiction and superheroes now. You know,
I mean, look to science fiction for like the ideas and the aesthetics of it, but like if you're looking for the stories, like don't go past like the '60s. Like you could basically before that, it's just like giant ants and giant they don't do. Well, I mean, whatever. There's probably good examples of people that do it that way, but it hadn't hit its stride yet, I guess.
At least not for us. But I can see how a lot of people would,
I know this makes me sound like I hate like science fiction 50s movies, and I don't. I grew up watching them.
Yeah, it's just not our genre, And but I think these movies have a certain kind of wholesome charm for a lot of people.
A lot of people probably think they have kind of like a repeat value. I guess I probably don't.
I would think Forbidden Planet a little bit, maybe more than The Day the Earth Stood Still. But
which would you choose over the two?
Well, I would definitely choose Forbidden Planet.
Okay.
I just think even though they both were slow and they both had like pacing problems, there was more going on in Forbidden Planet.
Yeah.
The Day the Earth Stood Still was so dry, and it really was just that one message. It was very, very serious.
It was kind of like a Twilight Zone.
Forbidden Planet at least had the suggestion of sex, It did have some troubling gender politics too, which we didn't even get into and we don't need to, but that's the 50s.
Well, so did the Day of the Year.
Yeah. But
I get into that one.
Yeah, but so I like Forbidden Planet. It had a little bit more. If I had to watch one of these again, I would definitely choose Forbidden Planet.
I think
it also looks terrific on Blu-ray.
I think it's close, but I would go with the same way. I think they're a little
bit more going on.
Creative. I think they probably had a little more fun with it.
Yeah,
and it kind of comes through.
Oh yeah, the Day the Earth Stood Still is they take themselves way too seriously. You know, Forbidden Planet, they came up with a neat little story, little kind of idea message at the end, but it had a little bit more of that Buck Rogers kind of just adventure in outer space. Plus, I love that title, Forbidden Planet. So good flick with a unique monster sequence. So there you go. So we will.
That was our first and last.
We will most certainly be back to talking about horror movies in the next episode of Brain Says Strange Things. So we appreciate this indulgence because we like all kinds of movies. I'm sure a lot of you do too.
Need a little spice in there.
Yeah, you got to shake things up every now and then. But next time we'll be back talking about horror movies.
This is the apology
on Brain Says Strange Things. So we appreciate you guys watching. Check us out on Facebook. And tune in next time. We'll be back real soon with another episode. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.